If King Arthur was ever a real person, he was a warrior king who led Britain against Saxon invaders. Those were tribes from what is now North Germany, in the late 5th and early 6th centuries, somewhere between 490 and 515 CE. These dates are still in the transition period between Celtic and Roman pagan Britain and early Christianity. So the works you read this week, The History of the Kings of Britain and The Life of Merlin, are technically set in those times. But their author, Geoffrey of Monmouth, lived and wrote these works firmly in the medieval period. He was born circa 1095 and died in either 1154 or 1155. It is thought that he was a member of the Benedictine order, and he was consecrated as a bishop in 1152, so he's definitely Christian. Indeed, by the early 1100s, British society was fully Christianized. Though we've already seen that pagan traditions persisted in many aspects of life, even if by this time those practices were divorced from the spiritual beliefs they originated from. In case you don't know, The History of the Kings of Britain gives us one of the earliest accounts of the famous King Arthur and the origins of his equally famous court wizard, Merlin. In the dedication to The History of the Kings of Britain, Monmouth claims the work is a translation of an older British book about historical kings, but this has been dismissed by modern scholars. If anything, Monmouth took his inspiration from Celtic and specifically Welsh mythology, creating the figure of King Arthur as a composite of the mythological heroes and historical Romano-British warlords who fought the Saxons after the end of the Roman rule in Britain. But let's look a bit deeper at this historical context. In Book 4 of The History of the Kings of Britain, which you did not read, Monmouth recounts the story of King Lucius, who, according to legend, was the first British king to convert to Christianity sometime in the 2nd century. What is really interesting for our purposes is that, historically speaking, we know that by the late 5th and early 6th centuries, the time period you did read about, Christianity was not yet fully and firmly established as the dominant religion of Britain. At this time, British kings were essentially tribal leaders. They often fought each other, and they did not necessarily all follow the same religious beliefs. It's a very dynamic period, with enduring Celtic pagan beliefs and practices blended to some extent with Roman pagan beliefs and practices, since the Romans occupied Britain from 43 to 410 CE. And these were also blended with early Christian beliefs and practices, which the Romans had brought with them as they began converting to the new religion. The point here is that Monmouth makes a deliberate choice to position the kings around Merlin, including King Arthur, as Christian, perhaps. You might be familiar with Merlin as the wizard in King Arthur's court, maybe from the TV show Merlin, which shows this character as a young wizard growing into his magical powers in a political context that frowns on magical practitioners. In Monmouth's text, Merlin is not so obviously magical. In the chapters before the selections you read, King Vortigern is shown negotiating for peace with the pagan Saxons. He sets up a peace conference at a Christian monastery. However, the Saxons betray him and kill 460 of his men who attended this peace conference he organized. The text is very specific in noting these men were given Christian burials. Nevertheless, at the opening of Book 6, Chapter 17, after King Vortigern of Britain has been beaten out of many of his fortresses by the Saxons, Monmouth recounts, quote, "At last King Vortigern had recourse to magicians for their advice, and commanded them to tell him what course to take. They advised him to to build a very strong tower for his own safety, since he had lost all his other fortified places." End quote. So while we can infer that Vortigern is a Christian king, he also has magicians. This is also the chapter where we meet Merlin for the first time and learn that his father is unknown, but his mother is a princess who lived with Christian nuns. In chapter 18, Merlin's mother describes how he was conceived by some kind of spirit, quote, "in the shape of a most beautiful young man," who then disappeared and who for a long time haunted me in this manner and then left her pregnant. Vortigern's philosophers suggest that this was an incubus. This is a Christian word for a non-human demon spirit, but pagans would have considered this a member of the Fae, also known as the fair folk, the fairies, or the good people. This is important to Vortigern because his magicians have advised him that he needs the blood of a child without a father to make his new tower strong. But it's important to us too because it illustrates how enmeshed the pagan and Christian worldviews are, that this character can be the product of a union between a Christian princess and the pagan spirit that visits her in the night. In chapter 19, Merlin calls out King Vortigern's magicians, arguing that his blood won't help keep the king's tower safe or strong because it's being built on ground that has a pond underneath and sleeping dragons in a rock at the bottom of the pond. On Merlin's advice, the king has his men dig down to find the pond, and then they drain it to find the dragons. And everyone present was, quote, "amazed at Merlin's wisdom, thinking it to be no less than divine inspiration," end quote. So here, Monmouth shows Merlin as a figure with his own magical history, overcoming the influence of the court magicians, but being repositioned as divinely inspired in the Christian sense. Merlin takes on the role of a prophet, especially in Book 7, where the narrative is interrupted so that he can make all kinds of predictions about events in the centuries to come. Monmouth, of course, who's writing from the 1100s, has the advantage of history to help him ensure that several of Merlin's predictions are correct. I also asked you to look at Book 8, where the narrative resumes, specifically chapters 10 to 20. In these chapters, Aurelius Ambrosius has overthrown Vortigern as king. Aurelius is definitely a Christian. In the first chapters of the book, he invokes the Son of God in battles against Saxon pagans. He encourages the conversion of those he conquers, and he builds churches. In chapter 10, Aurelius wants to raise a memorial monument to the Christian men killed at that peace conference that Vortigern organized all the way back in Book 6, chapter 15. Merlin advises Aurelius to send for an ancient stone structure called the Giant's Dance, which is in Ireland. And he says to move it to the gravesite near Salisbury in Britain. If you haven't already guessed, the Giant's Dance is another name for Stonehenge. Merlin explains, quote, "They are mystical stones and of a medicinal virtue. The giants of old brought them from the farthest coast of Africa and placed them in Ireland while they inhabited that country. Their design in this was to make baths in them, when they should be taken with any illness. For their method was to wash the stones and put their sick into the water, which infallibly cured them. With the like success, they cured wounds also, adding only the application of some herbs. There is not a stone there which has not some healing virtue." End quote. So Aurelius's brother, Uther Pendragon, Merlin, and 15,000 men head to Ireland to bring Stonehenge back. Historically speaking, we now know that Stonehenge predates these Briton kings, Merlin and the Saxons, by at least 2,500 years. But to Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 1100s, this must have been an awesome origin story to explain how that great big stone circle ended up on the Salisbury Plain. But it's also an opportunity for Monmouth to illustrate Merlin's wisdom and ingenuity in moving the stones. Take note that Merlin uses engineering, not magic. He is a wizard in the true sense of the term, a wise one, not a magician. From a medieval Christian perspective, this makes it a bit more acceptable for him to be helping Christian kings. Although Merlin is of questionable birth and maybe part demon, his prophetic knowledge has been called divinely inspired, and his actions are explained through engineering. He is not engaged in overtly pagan magical practices. Chapters 14 through 18 tell of the death of King Aurelius by poison at the hands of the Saxons, who are, you guessed it, again planning to invade. They also recount the appearance of a bright new star, probably a comet, that looked like a dragon. Merlin interprets this astronomical phenomenon as heralding the success of Aurelius's brother Uther Pendragon against his Saxon enemies, and the births of his two children, a powerful son who will rule all the kingdoms the star's ray can be seen from, and a daughter whose line of heirs will live on in Britain for many generations. Uther does defeat his enemies, buries his brother, and becomes king, then battles more pagan Saxons, killing thousands of them. I think it's important to note that while Uther describes his military successes as being, quote, by the favor of Christ, the perspective the text offers on the pagan Saxons is that they are a determined and annoying political threat. Their spiritual beliefs are not at issue. In chapter 19, Uther goes on a tour of his realm to restore peace and order. However, at an Easter festival, he meets Igerna, who is the wife of Gorlois, the Duke of Cornwall. King Uther falls in love, or is it lust? He besieges Gorlois and then asks Merlin to help access the woman he loves. Merlin advises, quote, to accomplish your desire, you must make use of such arts as have not been heard of in your time. I know how, by the force of my medicines, to give you the exact likeness of Gorlois, so that in all respects you shall seem to be no other than himself, end quote. Merlin transforms Uther to look like Gorlois, and Uther goes in disguise to Igerna's castle, successfully deceives her, and spends the night. Let's be clear, this is rape. Igerna has sex with a man she thinks is her husband, but it's not. It's also a transgression of the Christian commandment about not committing adultery. So while Uther might be a Christian king, he's not a very good Christian. Merlin, who facilitates this through his medicines, might also prompt us to ask what kind of potions he's using that can make a man look like another man closely enough to fool his wife. Is it hair dye? Cologne? This is as close as we get to seeing Merlin practice magic, in the sense that he does something that is seemingly supernatural, and no explanation is offered for how he does it. This rape results in the conception of Arthur, who is legitimized for the throne when Gorlois is killed and Uther then marries Igerna. Arthur, of course, goes on to become the king who leads the Knights of the Round Table, who come to embody the Christian ideal of chivalry and go on a quest to find the Holy Grail. The last selection I asked you to read, The Life of Merlin, tells of Merlin's madness. In this narrative, Merlin is clearly depicted as a Christian king. He calls upon Christ and God of heaven when he's feeling tormented. He buries his fallen comrades in chapels. We have evidence that he is Christian. However, when his men are killed in battle with the Scots, he very dramatically mourns them for days and then runs off into the forest to become a hermit. Quote, "He entered the wood and rejoiced to lie hidden under the ash trees. He marveled at the wild beasts feeding on the grass of the glades. Now he chased after them, and again he flew past them. He lived on the roots of grasses, and on the grass, on the fruit of the trees, and on the mulberries of the thicket. He became a sylvan man, just as though devoted to the woods. For a whole summer after this, hidden like a wild animal, he remained buried in the woods, found by no one and forgetful of himself and of his kindred. But when the winter came and took away all the grass and the fruit of the trees, and he had nothing to live on, he poured out the following lament in a wretched voice. Christ, God of heaven, what shall I do? In what part of the world can I stay, since I see nothing here I can live on, neither grass on the ground, nor acorns on the trees? Here once there stood 19 apple trees bearing apples every year. Now they are not standing. Who has taken them away from me? Whither have they gone all of a sudden? Now I see them, now I do not. Thus the fates fight against me and for me, since they both permit and forbid me to see." Consider what we've learned so far about pagans living according to the seasonal cycle of the year and worshipping nature deities. Merlin's time as a sylvan man is presented as a metaphorical return to paganism. On one hand, he calls to God of heaven for guidance, and almost in the same breath, he describes the fates as fighting for and against him. The fates are a pagan concept common to Greek, Slavic, Baltic, and Norse mythology. They are the goddesses or incarnations of destiny. So Merlin in the forest is in a struggle between his Christian faith and his pagan roots. In this narrative, Merlin's relations try repeatedly to rescue him and bring him home. But every time he goes back to the city, he's unable to endure people and tries to sneak off to the forest again. He even rejects his wife, asking that she choose a new husband and remarry. He tells his sister, quote, "I do not want a cow that pours out water in a broad fountain like the urn of the Virgin in summertime. Nor shall I change my care as Orpheus once did when Eurydice gave her baskets to the boys to hold before she swam back across the Stygian sands. Freed from both of you, I shall remain without the taint of love. Let her therefore be given a proper opportunity to marry, and let him who she shall choose have her." End quote. Take note here that all of the references he makes are to astronomy, Virgo, the Virgin with her urn, and Greek mythology, Orpheus, Eurydice, the Stygian sands. It seems by this point that he has regressed to fully embracing a pagan worldview. Meanwhile, his wife and sister, quote, "marveled that a madman should be so familiar with secret things," end quote, and make accurate prophecies. The use of the word madman here suggests that by the time Monmouth was writing, paganism was viewed as a kind of insanity that no Christian could possibly hold as having any truth. And although you did not need to read the full text, after Merlin goes to the forest and is forcibly returned to civilization several times, the text does end with him being healed. A miraculous new spring appears at the foot of the mountains, and Merlin drinks from it. In a clear metaphor for baptism, it washes away his madness, and he exclaims to God, quote, "O King, through whom the machine of the starry heavens exists, through whom the sea and the land with its pleasing grass give forth and nourish their offspring, and with their profuse fertility give frequent aid to mankind, through whom sense has returned and the error of my mind has vanished. I was carried away from myself, and like a spirit, I knew the acts of past peoples and predicted the future. Then, since I knew the secrets of things, and the flight of birds, and the wandering motions of the stars, and the gliding of the fishes, all this vexed me and denied a natural rest to my human mind by a severe law. Now I have come to myself, and I seem to be moved with a vigor, such as was wont to animate my limbs. Therefore, highest Father, ought I to be obedient to thee, that I may show forth thy most worthy praise from a worthy heart, always joyfully making joyful offerings. For twice thy generous hand has benefited me alone, in giving me the gift of this new fountain out of the green grass. For now I have the water which hitherto I lacked, and by drinking of it, my brains have been made whole." End quote. In other words, Merlin is suggesting here that while pagans might have insight into the cycles of nature, only the Christian God can heal the mind and soul. Keep in mind that the life of Merlin was written around 1150. Although Christianity had been the well-established dominant religion in Britain for several hundred years, this text is still working out the tensions between the weight and legacy of Britain's pagan past and the newer Christian religion that is at this time beginning to fortify its position as the only viable spiritual option.